Hello, everyone. Guess what? Today is session 80. And I really want to thank you for being on this journey with me, each and every one of you, as well as the people who are joining in for the first time today. Welcome and thank you for being here. And for those of you who've been here for the ride all along since March, we've kind of grown up together. So many changes have occurred in our lives, and also with keeping it light in terms of the format and all sorts of things. I'm delighted to know each of you and realize that also I have been very consistent with this. So life is teaching me new things that, yes, I can be very consistent. Cool. Anyway, I thought a lot about what to explore today. And I also thought about what we've been going through in the last couple of months. So many new innovative ideas have formed. So many of us have enjoyed being with family or getting in touch with old friends, or in the case of keeping it light, building new friendships, through these 80 sessions. And simultaneously, the world has experienced loss in a way that is unprecedented. And I'm not sure about you, but I know many people who personally have lost a family member, a dear friend, or a colleague to COVID. And travel bans have kept many families apart, even during tragedy. And over, I've thought and been asked, how can we deal with grief? How can we deal with pain? So, as I researched and studied more about this topic, I found amazing online resources that I will share after the session is over. There's a wonderful website called Headspace that I really urge you to look at. I also realized that as children, mostly we experience and thus learn several ways to celebrate, right? Whether it's a party or gifts or an outing or eating or drinking or making merry or special treats, we have through our childhood figured out along the way what works for us individually. For instance, if I ask people, I would say 90% of the people I've met enjoy desserts or sweet treats, and they associate it with pleasure, glee, happiness, enjoyment, celebration. They've experienced, not just enjoyed, sweet treats so much to the point of having developed a taste preference, right? Whoever I ask, what's your favorite ice cream? There are very few people who will say, I don't really know. They'll say, oh, vanilla, strawberry, or pistachio, or those who like only jalebi, or dark chocolate, or milk chocolate. That is not always the case when it comes to hardship, be it of any kind. Most of us are shielded from thinking or talking about these eventualities in life. Or we may have religious rituals and traditions that have been passed down to us or that we've adopted over time. And we go through these rituals almost like clockwork, even if we are not super present and able to participate in a ritual that's happening during a tough time. There are usually friends or neighbors who will get you through it, who will get us through it. But post the ritual, everyone kind of goes back to their own lives. It's true, we've all done that. We've checked in on a friend and then we've moved on. But after that ritual that the person who's grieving in has happened, what then? The ritual didn't actually heal you. So, how do you move forward? For me, from going through very specific and very different types of grief or loss, it could be loss of a loved one, a breakup, a loss of a friendship due to an argument, even temporarily feeling that loss of a pet, loss of material things, say if something got damaged or stolen, making an assumption about the loss of respect from someone you hold in high esteem, or an internal loss of self-worth or self-confidence. These are all spaces and ways, dimensions or nuances of loss and grief. And we spend a lot of our waking lives avoiding pain in more ways than one. When it comes to talking about these inevitable moments, it isn't always easy to express or to hear. And so today I want to share some combined topics from 3 Headspace articles and authors called Nina M. Okona, Farah Mohammed, and Suzanne Bowles. They've put together things from their own life experiences, which I found really helpful to read and to learn about, both from the perspective of someone who is grieving, as well as someone who's supporting someone who's grieving. So first off, from the perspective of one who is grieving, and I'll quote some of these. I thought I'd experienced loss enough times before to know what I was in for, and yet a messy, complicated, unresolved grief can be a beast all its own. I learned that there is no singular roadmap through grief, but there are signposts. You may grieve something rather than a person, and this is totally normal. You may disconnect cleanly from certain things and remain deeply attached to others. For instance, we can mourn marriages while needing a divorce. We can grieve family members that we never got along with in real life and not be a hypocrite. We can yearn for our homes long after we've settled into a new place. But identifying the source of your grief is integral to moving on. And it is difficult to treat a wound if you don't know where it is. There is no right way to cope, but there may be less painful ones. And it's well-known wisdom that there is no wrong way to grieve. Everyone is different. Some people gain weight or lose weight, feel numb, feel devastated, get into work, become workaholics almost. Some people may need a therapist to talk about it until it makes sense, or some may loathe discussing it and just want to get back to their normal life as soon as circumstances allow. Of course, I want to mention that if your grief is interfering with your work to the point that it is endangering your career, or you're isolating yourself for too long, or you're having thoughts of hurting yourself, there are minute but active efforts towards healing that may be a life jacket in rough times. And of course, if any of these feelings are familiar, you must speak to a doctor, a therapist, a counselor. Start even with a friend, but try to get help. Now, in cases where you feel that you can handle it on your own, these authors have mentioned some tips, some tricks even. One is to help get on with day-to-day business of living, like cleaning the house, doing the laundry, watering plants. Suddenly, if a memory or a thought becomes too vivid, one of the authors talked about naming things, looking around and just out loud naming things. Okay, table, chair, fridge, picture frame, window, vase, door, curtain. And some people have found that they would name 15 to 20 things before their mind disconnected from grief or a specific memory, and then started to focus on concrete things around them, on what was solid and still here and needed tending to, something to bring them back to the present. Secondly, the idea of radical acceptance is important. Choosing to accept the fact that something has changed is actually helpful. It's never comfortable, but it is less exhausting in the long run than the effort of constantly trying to fool yourself otherwise. Radical acceptance. 3, to manage tasks, trying to break them down into smaller subtasks. One author said, I didn't simply get dressed and go and buy food. I got up first. Then I found a clean shirt. Then I found jeans. Then I put them on. Then I found socks and shoes and put those on. Then I looked for my handbag. Then I found my list of groceries that I needed. Then I got my car keys. Then I locked the house and I went out. And making every task one focal point makes it manageable in a straightforward sequence of manageable things during a time when someone may feel they can't manage much at all. Fourthly, the authors say to be gentle with yourself. It is more productive and less painful to extend ourselves the same compassion that we would extend to someone we love who's hurting. When grieving, allowing ourselves bouts of unreasonable sadness, forgiving ourselves for not making it to an engagement, a party, or not being able to engage on social media, forgiving ourselves for imagining things and replaying them. And sometimes you have to allow that to happen so that you can process. Fifthly, discovering that emotional time travel is possible. We often hear that there's no timeline. And that may not only mean that you have an indeterminate amount of time to process the stages of grief at your own pace, but the fact that having gone through something before will not prepare you for a new moment of grief. Some feel that the earliest days are harder, not necessarily. Some may imagine that the moment someone passes is the moment that we'll accept it. Instead, maybe it takes a very, very long time for that to sink in. We may imagine that the funeral is a worse day, but in reality, that frenzied activity with people that you don't know, in some ways is helpful because your grief is not front and center. So with this, realizing that grief is different, one person's hardest will be another person's easiest. And mourning is as individual as people themselves. There is no one size fits all if you're grieving. Grief is not a straight road you walk down step by step, mile after mile. Grief is like a maze. And while you're navigating, you may find yourself looping back to where you were before. It doesn't mean you're not making progress. You're not working your way steadily through. So those were some perspectives given that someone is grieving. And like we said earlier, it can be any sort of loss that you are experiencing. And I think it's helpful to read these accounts because somewhere when something hits you in the future, you might remember one of these moments. Palak says that it's always after rituals, right? And for each person, it is different. So now, if we were to look at it from the point of someone who is trying to support a friend or a loved one who's grieving, here are a couple of things. And I love Headspace because the authors are actually talking about really funny things at times. And they are keeping it light. And at the same time, this advice is super valuable. Most of the times when someone passes away or, a great loss is happening or has happened, our phrases that we're taught to say are, oh, my deepest condolences, or I'm so sorry for your loss, or I'm sorry. But after that, after those few sort of rehearsed phrases, we have to wing it. We have to improvise it. And not everyone is a good improviser, especially not in a high pressure situation. When we open our mouths and discover that we have to suddenly fill this quiet, awkward space, or even the space on a chat with something other than those one or two rehearsed phrases, what pops out can sometimes be absurd. And I would love to read out some of the things that I am sure we have all said at some point. And the beautiful thing about growing and learning is that we can check, we can be aware that maybe these other knee jerk responses are actually not as helpful. So, for instance, when someone's gone through, let's say, the loss of a job, or they've lost a pet, or they're they're going through a breakup, or they've lost a loved one, platitudes like, "Oh, look at the bright side," or "Try to be positive," or "It does get easier," these are not the most helpful, right? And you feel it. And at the same time, I think a lot of us say these things unknowingly, unthinkingly. Many people are just trying to get by. So, platitudes is something that we might want to avoid. For instance, again, "I can imagine," or "I know how you feel." Even if we have gone through it, our experience is totally different from the person who's grieving right now. So we probably don't know how someone feels. "You'll find someone else" is a thing that people say a lot. And I don't know if that's helpful. You know what? "She would want you to be happy." The author says probably, but we really didn't get a chance to, discuss it before they went. And of course, things like, "They're in a better place." Really? Do we know? We could say that, and I know it's coming from love, it's coming from a good intention. But these authors who talk about how to handle grief for someone, or how to be comforting, really comforting, say, try not to say that. It's actually not helpful. So, on these lines, try to avoid empty help phrases or cliches. For instance, "Let me know if you need anything," or "Call me if you need something." It is actually so full of good intention because you're telling the person that you're caring for that you're available to them. But you're also putting the pressure on the person who is going through this situation in their life to muster up the courage and actually reach out to you. And we've uttered it so many times, it just comes out naturally to us. But while it conveys good intention, it does very little to soothe. And it means that someone who needs help may not be thinking about that. In this way, the authors on Headspace say, can you take ownership of your support? Can you create a path for others to walk through with ease? Avoid that situation where others who are grieving have to do heavy lifting to enlist your support. Instead, think about your strengths and act on them. Think simply and figure out what you're good at, which might add value. Are you an amazing cook? Maybe you can make a beautiful meal, a nourishing meal, some soup or some sandwiches or whatever it is, even a hot thermos of tea, and drop it off. If you're gifted with creativity, maybe, offer to design the obituary or make a card, or go sit with your friend and do something creative. Maybe do a painting class with them if they feel like. Basically, the authors on Headspace are saying show up, be proactive, offer suggestions of practical things based on what you know about your friend or your loved one, rather than offering open-ended and sometimes empty offers. The other thing is to just allow them their pace and their time, knowing that there's no timeline for grieving. Everyone has a different way of dealing with things, and it's safer to assume that they're likely still mourning instead of thinking or telling them they should move on. We want so badly to help each other, to save and protect and shield and reverse and circumvent suffering for those that we love and care for. As the ambulance goes by, the thing is that grief needs to be processed. Everyone processes in their own way and especially in their own time. So allow people to grieve, love them through the grief. And I find that it's useful when I'm feeling like fixing something or someone to ask myself, am I saying this so they feel better or so that I feel better for having said this to them? Listen. Listen. Let a grieving person talk. There's no need to find a way to soothe. Just being there is enough. Don't be afraid to bring up their loved one's name. Don't avoid it. Don't ignore them. A lot of times, grieving people want to talk and to remember and to celebrate them in some way, unless they tell you that they don't want to talk about this person. Primarily, go easy on judgment. Loss is not something people can get over in a split second. And therefore, offering to help with big tasks is wonderful, and helping with really mundane tasks is also good. And at the end of it, be prepared for unexpected reactions. Some people will cry, some people may have angry outbursts, some people may hold on to specific things, some people may want to clean and purge and get rid of everything. Everyone will do it differently. And if we can be compassionate and empathetic and resist the urge to take anything personally, it will help. Sometimes all we can do is be supportive, check in, and it may still be met with apathy or no response. And understanding that others will take their time and may not be in the space to show gratitude or even receive support is important. Communicate your love and support and leave the door open for when they are ready. So let's take a moment to breathe. Is there something we're grieving about in our personal lives, or is there someone that we know that is grieving? How can we show up for ourselves in our self-talk, in our reflection, and how can we show up for others? Many people are writing about simply asking how someone feels and listening, learning how to listen without thinking of a response. Yes, I agree. But you know something? Sometimes asking someone how you are, they don't know how to answer. So it's, there isn't one size fits all even for comfort. And I think giving ourselves to also make mistakes is really important. So let's take one breath in, or many as needed, and exhale. And just remember that life is unexpected. There are beautiful, beautiful moments in life, as well as deeply sorrowful. And it's important for us to train, to learn, to grow, and understand how to deal with both. All right, beautifuls. You have an amazing day and weekend ahead. Thank you for being here for 80 sessions. Thank you for asking me about this topic. There's been multiple people who have written in, who have called, asking about grief. Let's normalize it. Let's normalize talking about loss and grief. Let's normalize seeking ways to be supportive. Let's normalize learning how to cope, learning mechanisms, learning tips and tools and tricks, and learning the signs so that we can be helpful. not only to others, but especially to ourselves. Love you all so, so, so much. And I'll see you next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Mwah! Be kind to yourself, okay? Be kind. Bye, everyone.